What's up, PokeGeeks? It's your boy, PokeGeek Dom, back with another video. This one's gonna be on kind of a hot topic, one that everybody's talking about right now, but I wanted to make a video that's all about the current state of grading. But before we get to that, you know the usual drill. Don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to hit the like, hit the bell, make sure that you're getting my videos as soon as they come out, so that way you're up to date with all the current information. You can see videos just like this one that's gonna explain some current happenings and how you can deal with them, or what we can do, or really just to analyze the situation and, you know, have the most information we can about it and adjust accordingly. So with that, let's get into it. So most people by now, you've probably heard the recent news that PSA is shutting their doors on all tiers below Super Express, which is $300 per card to get graded. Now, for most of us, that's pretty much undoable for, you know, most of the cards we want to get graded, and, you know, that prices out a lot of people, especially in the flipper market, as far as trying to flip cheap cards and turn that into bigger money or profits, you know, from getting those cards graded and then flipping them, or what most people call a graded flip. So really in this video, I want to go through, you know, how we got to this current state that we're in with grading, you know, aside from the boom of just collectibles in general over the last couple of years, but also just really talk about the grading companies themselves and what they've been doing and how we've kind of reached this point in the last few years. So I'll start with, you know, going over how we reached this point, essentially looking into the history of, you know, what has happened over the last couple of years to get us here. Next, I'll go over the current state of grading and what companies are doing right now, or what's happening with graded cards, and what choices we have in order to get our cards graded, both, you know, in inexpensive ways and also with turnaround times that are reasonable. And then after that, I'll look at some of the prospects as far as new companies that are coming onto the scene as far as grading, whether or not, you know, you can see those as trustable places to send your cards to get those graded, whether these are just companies to keep an eye on in the future. But essentially, we'll take a look at what could possibly be some future names to look out for when it comes to getting your cards graded. So first, I'd like to go over the history of the last couple of years and how we've kind of reached this current state of grading cards that we're in right now. Before 2020, there were really only two major grading companies. Most people know them already. That's PSA and BGS. Now, in February 2020, there was an article put out by Sports Collectors Daily, essentially saying that PSA was dealing already with a major backlog, and this article itself was pointing towards a lot of the box breaks and things that were happening in the sports card market, but also that Pokemon was starting to surge and become more of a bigger thing that people were starting to get their cards graded for. So that was also increasing the backlog. In June of 2020, BGS suspends their 10-day tier, but also reports that they have an 11-month backlog on their bulk tier. Also in June of 2020, this is when CGC starts to grade trading cards with Pokemon and Magic the Gathering. They come onto the scene pretty much at a kind of inflection point in the market, and we'll see that as we go further on through this timeline, but they really came in at kind of a really opportune moment. Now, in October of 2020, PSA puts out another newsletter, this one saying that they're ending their voucher program, also that they're suspending the economy tier, and then they're making alterations to the value tier, which made it a little easier to send cards in because they lowered the minimum amount of cards that you needed in order to send those in, but I believe the price also went up a bit. In October, we're seeing PSA already dealing with a backlog that is causing them to have to suspend certain tiers. and this was already kind of a grim foretelling of what was gonna be coming in the future. Now, on February 16th, less than a year since CGC had arrived on the scene, they raised their prices for pretty much every tier of grading that they had. They were already way cheaper than PSA to begin with, but that was kind of something that a lot of people felt was in the making and coming as their backlog continued to grow throughout the holiday season, and with the giant boom that came with Pokemon pretty much from October to November into December and now into our present day. Now, 2 weeks later, on March 1st, PSA then puts out a newsletter saying that they're raising prices. Not just raising prices by a little bit, they're raising every tier by almost double. Now, this was a big surprise for a lot of people and kind of caught a lot of people off guard when it comes to, getting their cards graded cheaply, but it was almost a had to be done move for PSA because with the rate at which people could get their cards graded as cheap as they could, they were just taking in so many submissions that there was just no possibility of ever ending the backlog that they're dealing with. Now, on March 12th, just about a couple weeks after PSA raises prices and about a month after CGC themselves had raised prices, CGC then has a large increase in their turnaround times. You had already seen slowly but surely increases in the turnaround times from November to February, but now in March we saw both the bulk and the economy tiers jump by almost 40 business days. This has pretty much made it to where getting anything graded through CGC at the bulk or economy tiers, you're looking at 4+ months before you get that return. This is almost coming to the point to where CGC is now starting to further increase their backlog to where they're getting to the point not far behind PSA. And again, with BGS, we don't get very many updates, but needless to say, I'm sure their backlog being at 11+ months back in June of 2020 is equally as bad as PSA and CGC's now growing backlog. And that brings us to the most recent news. In the April newsletter that PSA puts out, PSA announces that they're suspending all tiers below Super Express, which Super Express is $300 per card to get them graded. Like I said, that prices out a lot of flippers, a lot of people who are grading cards, even people who want to just grade for their collection, who want to grade cheaply because they love those cards, not because they care anything about increasing value or anything like that by getting them graded. They just want them encapsulated to make sure that those cards stay in their, current condition and never get any worse. And what it further explains in the newsletter is that they'll be suspending these tiers until a target date of July 1st of 2020. And they mentioned that they'll be slowly rolling out the tiers as they dwindle the backlog and get that caught up. But essentially, PSA's backlog has reached a state where it is physically unmanageable. They don't have the actual physical space to store the amount of stuff that is being submitted to them. Now just think about that for a minute, because not only has CGC expanded their physical location with buying another warehouse, PSA also recently did that with buying more physical location. And they still cannot store what is being sent to them. That is crazy. So during the time of this past year, going through companies having growing backlogs, CGC coming onto the scene, kind of doing their best to prove that they're trustworthy in that time, and that is kind of shown in the sales, like the sold listings of certain graded cards, you can look through, but CGC has quickly started to catch up with the value of PSA. It's not nearly as equivalent, but it's getting there. And during that time, as more people come to trust CGC, or more people felt forced into the decision of going with CGC because not only were they cheaper, but they also had a lot quicker turnaround times than you were dealing with PSA or BGS. So CGC kind of quickly earned people's trust, is essentially what I'm getting at. And with earning that trust, that also means that now the PSA is shut down for the next few months, possibly longer. That's really just an estimate. That's what I don't see a lot of people talking about. A lot of people are taking that July 1st as a hard sell date, but it seems more like that's an estimate on their part to get through the backlog, or enough of the backlog by that point. But during this time, enough people have given their trust to CGC that I think that it's just going to be a giant tidal wave of people that were grading with PSA. Maybe not the ones who are hardcore PSA graders. They'll probably stick it out, wait until the backlog's done and be like, I'll be first through the gate. I'll camp outside of PSA headquarters for a week until they, reopen grading, and I'll be the first one through. And there are people who will do that. But for a lot of people in the meantime who don't have the patience, or, they need to keep moving product, or keep, buying and selling things, buying raw and getting things graded and selling them, trying to make money on that increased value, they're going to look at CGC because their doors are still open for the time being. And I say that for a reason, but that tidal wave is just going to send itself over to CGC. There's going to be just a massive submissions, and they were already getting a massive amount of submissions, to where their backlog is increasing exponentially. And now you have this on top of it. Like, I don't see any way, and this is just my personal opinion, don't take this as gospel, but this is just my personal opinion about what I see could be coming in the future. And that's that PSA shuts their doors, a tidal wave goes to CGC, their backlog then becomes unmanageable, just like PSA's is, and they have to shut their doors on some of their tiers. At the very least, we'll likely see CGC raise their prices at some point again. A lot of people think that's crazy because they just raised their prices, 2 months ago? Not even. But they have to do something to stem the kind of cards that are being sent in. Because there are just too many first edition Jungle Oddishes being sent into CGC in bulk orders that is just a massive amount. And you can't really blame the people, because if at $9 a card you can send in that first edition Oddish and get $30, $40, $50 for it. And people are doing this, all day long. And eventually that's going to dry up, and people will be be stuck holding 100 first edition Oddishes. Sorry, Oddish, for all the Oddish lovers out there. I really see this going in a kind of cycle, where PSA is going to shut their doors, CGC is going to be inundated, and eventually reach the point to where they kind of have to shut their doors, on some tiers, who knows, how each company deals with it. I'm sure they'll find their own ways, but it's likely that you'll see lower tiers go away to try and deal with stemming that increase in backlog. And so we'll see that happen to CGC. Then, PSA will reopen their doors. They'll get inundated with a tidal wave for all the people who can no longer use CGC in a cheap way. And then we'll just see that cycle go back and forth like a ping pong kind of match, where both of these companies kind of go back and forth. BGS is there somewhere in the middle. We can talk about the inconsistencies of BGS grades and stuff like that, but a lot of that stuff is anecdotal. But I could put examples on the screen that anybody can see clear as day. But BGS doesn't do a really great job of reporting where your order is, and how your amount of turnaround days that you're really going to be expecting, and so they really don't keep up with their stuff like CGC and PSA seems to be. Like, they stay at the forefront of making sure that their customers know what's going on, and it doesn't seem to be as much of a concern with BGS. At least that's my experience. Now, what are some of the things that this means for us right now, today? First of all, let's give a shout out and pour one out for middleman services, because all the middleman services out there, whether it's Graded Gem, Z&G Emporium, what's up, Ludkins, any of those middleman services, they all are just completely blindsided by this and completely railed by it. And if I can say anything, it's, if you use some of these middleman services, like, be understanding. Like, try and, just give them the benefit of the doubt. Because a lot of these guys, it's, just very few employees who are doing this job, and they stay up all night, packing orders and getting your orders in and making sure they're right. And also, you can get graded cards at a pretty cheap cost. Give them the benefit of the doubt. They were blindsided by this entire thing just as much as the rest of us were. So, and they have a lot of money riding on the line too. So do your, stay up on it, but, be empathetic, or at least sympathetic, to what they're going through as well. I think something that, probably has to be brought up is that PSA is like just a major hinge of the sports card industry when it comes to the secondary market. Like, everything sports cards pretty much goes through PSA. And while they've played around with some of the other companies here and there, none of them have really stood out that much. You see BGS sometimes, you see, SCG sometimes, but for the most part, just about everything's through PSA. So to have that shut down for that amount of time for sports card collectors and sports card flippers, it's just, it's hard to know what they should do, because their market's completely different than ours. Pokemon and Magic the Gathering were kind of quick to accept, maybe not quick, but we're more willing to accept CGC as a grading company. And it doesn't seem that sports cards are as willing to have an open mind about other companies. Not that, you should just willy-nilly use any company, but, it seems if they do their research and, really look behind, what companies you can trust. Like, CGC has their own sports card grading company, but I never see CSG really talked about. But that's something that they're going to have to deal with, and that's going to be a major shift, in their market for the next few months. So I'm sure that's going to affect everything in some way. So essentially, with the shutdown of tiers and, the increase in prices, and like I said, I do think another price increase is quickly looming, on the horizon. That's just my personal belief. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't have any inside sources, but, I really think that we're headed in that direction. So with that being said, I think, some of what that means is we have to be more diligent about what cards we're sending in to get graded. That doesn't mean that someday, your first edition Oddish might not be worth $50, $75 again in the future, whenever it's graded. But we should be, using a lot more scrutiny on what we decide to send in. It should be those cards that are really worth getting graded, that are really going to, turn out value. You're not looking to get commons graded. Yes, right now you can make money on that stuff, but when you get stuck holding the bag, you're not gonna ever look at your box of PSA first edition Oddishes. You're gonna stick that back there in the closet somewhere and never look at it ever again. But if you get stuck with a bunch of, Neo Hollows that you got graded because you got them in a big collection that you bought, and you decided, I'm going to fork out, the extra money, but I'm going to get these graded because I think that they're going to be really valuable in the future, even more so than they are now. We have to use more scrutiny, and that'll help, stem the backlog as well. I know that's kind of like speaking into the wind because, there's just people are going to do what they're going to do. They're going to send in tons and tons and tons of cards, like this tidal wave of submissions isn't going to end. So, but this is just my advice to you guys, what you can do, in order to kind of help yourself out. Don't get stuck with a bunch of cards that are stuck in turnaround times that you're never going to see again, because we're quickly headed that way too, where turnaround times become so unmanageable that you send in cards and you may not see them for a year. And to me, that's unacceptable. Like, I'm not going to pay for a service that I don't even know if I'm going to be charged for it a year later. Like, how do you future proof and plan for that? It's not easy. So just a little thing that you can do, make sure that you're, being diligent about what you're sending in. Don't just send in anything just because you might make $10 on it. It's not worth it. The risk you're taking in order to make that $10 profit is not worth, the possibility of being stuck with it. Speaking of, those solutions, like I said, one of the things you can do for yourself, number one, is use more patience, be more diligent about what you send in to get graded. That'll help you in the long run. But on top of that, I've got a few others. We'll be stuck in kind of this wax and wane cycle between PSA and CGC for the time being. But some of the things we may see in the future that could help alleviate the problem. We do know that both companies are just hiring on a massive scale. They're doing everything they can to try and get more graders into their workforce. So that will, as time goes on, will continue to grow, and with that means they can handle more of that backlog at once. You also have more physical expansion. Both of these companies just recently physically expanded their warehouses, but you may see even more to deal with the current demand and the current amount of submissions that they're receiving. So as their capacity increases and then also their workforce increases, you'll then be able to see these companies have to, shut down less, or maybe close certain tiers less because they get too inundated with the amount of submissions. That capacity will help them deal with that amount to where they can hold them. With that higher amount of workforce, you'll then see their output go up. They'll be able to deal more with the backlog to where it's not exponentially growing with every week. This isn't really a solution, but one thing that, we should note about what's probably coming in the future is that while PSA is shut down, for those tiers, they're not going to be getting as many submissions. And during that time, they're likely going to take a bunch of their people and either cross-train them to be graders, or, just on top of their usual hiring, have more people doing grading. So it's likely that we see their output increase over the next few months while they try and get through that backlog. So while they're doing that, we'll see that increase of supply being, injected into the market. So it's not a foregone conclusion, but depending on how much of an increased supply you're seeing go into the market, you may see price moves happen because of that on certain things. Now, obviously, you never know what's actually being submitted there and what's coming back into the market. So your guess is as good as anyone's, but it should be noted that their output is going to increase for this amount of time while they're shut down in those other tiers and they're working on that backlog, pushing out as much as they can. One of the last solutions I wanted to talk about is one that is kind of, I had to do a bit of research on because I wasn't familiar with a lot of these places and a lot of these companies, but I wanted to do the due diligence, bring you guys the information about them. And likewise, you should still do your due diligence. Make sure you do research on these companies if you decide to choose to grade with any of them. But I wanted to talk about some of the lesser known grading companies. It may be that someday in the future we see one of these companies kind of rise like the cream to the top and become the next CGC. Essentially, they'll take on that cheaper either modern product or bulk product because they'll have cheaper rates coming onto the scene as a new company on the block, but they'll also have those quicker turnaround times. So you may see as people start to trust a new company, more people go over there. And so you see some of that market share, some of that backlog kind of move away from CGC and PSA to another company. And that'll help all three of those companies, or four if you include BGS, kind of deal with their collective backlog, you know, as a hobby. The first company I'll talk about is SGC. This company was formed in 2018 and only had 12 employees up until just this past year. So those are already kind of reddish flags for me, like a company that's kind of brand newish, you know, just came onto the scene like right when collectibles started to get popular. So they don't have a lot of history behind them, which is something that I generally look for when I'm, you know, thinking about trusting, you know, a company that's going to actually do the authentication and grading process and have integrity and all those other kind of things, that they have a history of doing the right thing and having a leg to stand on. Now, SGC has about a 1 to 2 month turnaround on their cheapest tier, but their cheapest tier is $75 a card, which is pretty steep when it comes to just about any grading company. Like, you could look over at CGC and their walkthrough tier is $75 and you get that back in a couple of days. So I don't know if SGC should really be the company you're looking at if we're talking about trying to get the most value out of getting your card graded. Now, one thing I should mention is their case is a little different. It does have a black border around the actual card and label. Some people like it, some people don't. It's subjective, you know, you can make a decision for yourself, but that's SGC. The next one is GMA, and I wanted to mention this company just because I see it talked about here and there, and I wanted to make sure that the information is out there about GMA. GMA is a company that lists a residential address as their actual company address. That already is red flag number one. Like, just in my mind when I see that, I just think of somebody sitting in their garage, you know, with giant stacks of boxes and cards, like, you know, just hanging out, you know, listening to the radio and, you know, like slabbing cards on their workbench. Like, no care given to, you know, the grades. They just kind of look it over and say whatever. So that's what I see in my mind when I think residential address as their business address. But moving on for that, GMA has also been known to offer services where you can pay to actually put whatever you want on the label of the card. That includes the grade. So any company where you can actually pay them to get whatever you want on there, even if the label doesn't match the card, you know, you can say it's a 10, even if it's very obvious that this card is destroyed and dented and has whitening all over it and scratches on the foil. It looks like a cat tried to chew on it. But yeah, you know, paid the money, so put a 10 on there. Any company that's willing to offer a service like that, I do not trust. And honestly, neither should you. You know, I'm going to be very blunt about that. You know, they can dislike me, come downvote me, GMA lovers. I really don't give a care about that. But, you know, GMA, watch out for them. That's not a great company to invest in. Now, the next two companies I wanted to talk about are actually cropping up in the cold north above us, and that's our Canadian brethren. And the first one I'll start with is KSA. Now, KSA, I have seen some anecdotal evidence of inconsistent grades. Now, I feel like we have seen that with a few companies, even PSA themselves. So that's not enough for me to really be like red flag, no way, but that's kind of a yellow flag, we'll say. Now, KSA does kind of lack a history with trading cards like Pokemon, Magic the Gathering, anything like that. They've mostly dealt with sports cards, mostly hockey because it's Canada, but they don't have much of a history dealing with trading cards, and that kind of worries me when it comes to making sure that the card I'm sending in to get graded is labeled properly, especially if it's a another language card like a Japanese promo or something like that. They may not know what set it's from. They may mislabel the card or put the wrong name on there, put the wrong year on there. That's just something that I want to be able to send my card in and know that even if I mislabel it on the submission form, that the company has the wherewithal, they have the knowledge, they have the, graders who have the history and the knowledge of the product to know what that actual item is, even if I mislabeled it on the submission form. So that's something that you have to keep an eye out. Again, not really a red flag, but more of a yellow flag, but still 2 yellow flags doesn't equal a red. But now KSA does have autograph authentication. Now that's not something that a lot of these other companies are offering, so that is something that kind of gives them a little bit of a leg to stand on. So I like seeing that they're involved in other things, which also includes coin grading. Now that's another thing that, kind of gives me a little bit more of a reason to feel good about this company. When I was first looking into CGC, the thing that really made me feel secure about sending my cards to them was the fact that they had already been grading so many things for so long. They've been grading comics, coins, paper money, stamps, you just about name it. CGC has a division that grades it. So it gave me more of a reason to lean into CGC when I felt like they actually had a history of grading and authenticating, all sorts of different things. So that is a good thing for KSA. Now, the thing I will say about KSA is currently their bulk submission turnaround time is 3 months. So it's already kind of up there as far as turnaround time when it comes to our main companies with CGC, and it's obviously way less than PSA, even though you can't even send it that tier right now. With KSA, you are looking at about 3 months for their bulk tier, so right around maybe a little quicker than what CGC's at currently. The thing you should remember though, if you are choosing one of these two companies or any other international company, yes, that does count as international for you US viewers, but that may mean increased shipping costs both to and from the grading company because you're going over country lines. So just keep that in mind. And that was pretty much KSA. Now, the other Canadian company I wanted to talk about is Mint Grading, or MNT. Now, Mint Grading I haven't seen a lot of recognition for online. In fact, I even had some trouble kind of finding out a lot of information about it other than from their website. But it does seem that they've mostly been involved with sports cards, but they do trading cards. I was able to find, plenty of trading cards that were being graded by Mint. I will say that their cheapest bulk option is $13 a card, which isn't that bad compared to a lot of other companies right now. But I should also mention, you look at the slab and it's very similar to BGS's slab. It's almost like you take the BGS logo out and you just put the Mint one there, and it's like the exact same label. But they do have like a black label variant, a gold label, a silver label variant, depending on what grade you get. So for some people that might be kind of interesting, getting like a silver, gold, and black version of certain cards. So I think that's not a bad idea to kind of go with, a bit of a gimmick that gives people a reason to collect different versions of that graded slab. Just something to keep an eye on. With that being said, like I said at the beginning, make sure to do your due diligence, do your research. Don't just send your cards to any old company that says they'll stick it in a plastic case and stick a number on a piece of paper for you. It really takes a company that has a history of authentication, a history of consistent grading, that gives people the trust that when they see, hey, this is a CGC 9.5, that I can look at it and I say, I can look it over. But for the most part, whenever I get something from this company and I look at a 9.5, I'm almost certain it's a 9.5 in there. Like anytime I look over a CGC card, I will see the grade. I'll say a 9.5. Okay, let's look this over. And by the time I get to the end of looking that card over, I'm like, they were right. It was a 9.5 or it was an 8 or whatever it may be. There are plenty of times I look at cards from other companies where I look at the grade, and by the end of looking at it, I may not always come to the same conclusion as what the grade on that card is. And that's kind of a problem with some of these companies. That inconsistency, while, for the short term may not actually be all that problematic, but in the long term, as you damage your trust with the people who send you cards and trust you to grade their cards in a consistent way, that has long-term ramifications that some of these companies will have to deal with eventually. So that's the video, guys. Like I said, the best course of action right now, I know we've all been saying this about just about everything in the Pokemon community, but have patience, use scrutiny when it comes to what cards you're getting graded right now. It won't be a long time. I imagine in a few years from now, maybe even shorter than that, we'll all look back at this time and think about how crazy and how expensive everything was and how hard it was to get your cards graded and about these companies shutting down and everything. And we'll have a good laugh about it, and we'll send our cards in bulk and never think twice. So I appreciate you guys watching this video. I know it was a super serious one, but it was a pretty hot topic that, I felt pretty strongly about. So I wanted to get a video out in a reasonable amount of time to where, it's still kind of on everybody's minds. But thanks for watching. If you watched all the way to the end, I appreciate you guys. And, as always, stay geeky.